Republicans can always count on Marjorie Taylor Greene to tackle a bad situation and make it so much worse, because as the political momentum continues to shift in favor of Vice President Harris, Greene spoke at a Trump rally in Georgia in which she blew the dust off a couple of wildly unpopular lies that may help cost Trump the election. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a couple of clips to talk about in this video. We recently did a video about the Trump rally in Atlanta, Georgia, in which Donald Trump said some unhinged stuff. But hey, he wasn't alone. Marjorie Taylor Greene also spoke at that rally, and you can always count on her to say some wildly stupid, unhinged things as well, including bringing up the lie about the 2020 election, the idea that it was stolen from Donald Trump, as well as blowing the dust off another lie that we don't hear as often, which is that under Trump, there were no lockdowns and Democrats instead were the party of COVID lockdowns. We're going to play the clip and unpack it together.
Then our election, Georgia, was stolen from us. That's right. Right down the road from here with the water main break. That's right. And then it all changed. And we watched the Democrats shut this country down and destroy our freedoms over a virus that came from China.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, is reliably unhinged. Obviously, the 2020 election wasn't stolen. This is a lie which turns off independent voters. Even though 70% of Republicans believe that President Biden did not win the 2020 election freely and fairly, the vast majority of the country does recognize that fact. And in a hotly contested election in which Trump's lead is rapidly evaporating, he needs to try to court as many independents as possible, especially if there's maximum vote out. As we talk about on this channel, if the Trump coalition and the anti-Trump coalition both turn out maximally, Trump loses because the anti-Trump coalition was, is, and shall always be bigger than the pro-Trump coalition. So what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing here, relitigating the 2020 election in which she and her side were squarely on the losing side of, both in terms of the election results and then the subsequent litigations and the PR war. This is really bad strategy for Greene, but Greene is also really, really stupid and she can't help but do it. The other thing she talks about, though, is this idea that Democrats were responsible for COVID lockdowns. Now, COVID, as you may or may not remember, began when Donald Trump was president of the United States. It began in early 2020 in earnest, probably around March is really when the pandemic was starting to hit full stride. Donald Trump was president of the United States. He was the commander-in-chief. He was the head of state, head of government. Joe Biden was merely a former vice president running for office. So it's important to remember who had the power and who had the responsibility to manage the pandemic. I'll also point out that despite the fact that it was an election year and the Democrats understandably loathed Donald Trump, actually tried to impeach him just a few months before because he tried to extort Ukraine with congressionally approved foreign aid in exchange for them to investigate Joe Biden, a domestic political rival that led to an impeachment that Donald Trump managed to avoid conviction of just because Republicans are so partisan. Despite all of that, Democrats, particularly in the House, led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, were willing to work with Trump to manage the pandemic. They were so good faith, even during an election year, even though it would be perhaps politically expedient to obstruct and to make the pandemic harder for him. No. Instead, they put the country first and worked with him to pass two major COVID stimulus bills for which Trump got the credit in an election year. It was a remarkable act of selflessness and statesmanship from the Democratic Party. But Donald Trump was responsible for managing the pandemic, and he did horribly. Okay, so just want to remind people, because sometimes conservatives and centrists forget the timeline. Joe Biden wasn't in power. The Democrats weren't in power. The Republicans were. I'll also remind you that when it came to lockdowns, the vast majority of states in this country imposed lockdowns at various points. Between March and April 2020, 43 governors issued orders directing residents to stay at home and non-essential businesses to close in response to the coronavirus pandemic. All Democratic governors, 24, issued stay-at-home orders in their states, while 19 of the 26 Republican governors issued stay-at-home orders. So it was damn near 50-50. Republican governors, the vast majority of Republican governors, also imposed lockdowns on their states. So this idea that Republicans and Trump did not create lockdowns or support lockdowns is simply not true. I do want to actually play a couple of clips here because Trump is being, Trump during the Republican primary was hammered on this point by Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida. I want to play you some clips and then read parts of a Wall Street Journal op-ed about Trump's own direct involvement with lockdowns.
And when you look at the two men and you put them side by side and you look at their record, Governor DeSantis has ones that's unapologetic and has delivered, right? You saw President Trump stand with Anthony Fauci and have him try and force Florida into lockdowns. Governor DeSantis stood against that, got kids back into school, and made sure that Florida stayed open.
So this was when DeSantis was running against Trump, right? And eventually DeSantis found his teeth and made a point to hammer Trump on this, that Trump empowered Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Fauci, Dr. Deborah Birx, and Dr. John Redfield of the CDC, NIH, all of those institutions, they did recommend lockdowns. Now, I would argue it was a brief moment of responsibility, a very brief moment of responsibility from Trump in that he supported the lockdowns, at least initially. But if you're upset at the lockdowns, if you think they're bad for America, then it would be dishonest to try to disassociate Trump from those lockdowns, given that it was his CDC, his NIH, his medical advisors who made the recommendation, and Trump himself actually supported lockdowns. Again, we'll get to that. But I also want to show you a Ron DeSantis attack ad on Trump for his involvement with the lockdowns and his support of Dr. Fauci. Again, something that I, as a Democrat, somebody who is a progressive, somebody who supports Fauci and our earnest efforts to try to contain the virus, this is actually one of the few things that Trump did that wasn't totally bad. But we'll play the clip and unpack it.
And of Dr. Fauci was Ron DeSanctimonious. He's a good man. I like Dr. Fauci a lot. I'm not firing him. I think he's a wonderful guy. How would you like to be in my position? I just created the greatest, strongest economy in the world. I had to shut it down, and we did the right thing. We've done pretty much what he and others recommended. He's very important to me.
You actually gave him a presidential commendation before he left office. Wouldn't you like a do-over on that?
I don't know who gave him the commendation. I really don't know who gave him the commendation.
Should you have fired Fauci?
I did it right, because if you do fire him, you're going to have a firestorm on the left again, as usual. And you're open, and you didn't close, and it's just amazing, right? He enjoys very high popularity, and that's for a reason. The reason is he's doing a good job. And I want to just congratulate the governor and everybody.
And then, of course, it just turns into Trump praising DeSantis, and then, of course, Trump stopped praising DeSantis when it was politically convenient. But yeah, Trump actually has a history of empowering those advocating for lockdowns, at least for some time. Then he would, intermittently attack Fauci for other things as well. That was the problem, was Trump's inconsistency on this matter. But the Wall Street Journal, a conservative publication, they actually wrote an op-ed about this, 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, shortly, I think it was about the time, shortly after Trump announced that he was seeking re-election in 2024. And they talked about COVID lockdowns. COVID lockdowns disqualified Trump in 2024. Quote, 15 days to stop the spread, end quote, turned into an eternity. March 29th, 2020 is a day that should live in infamy. The National Mitigation Plan against COVID-19, quote, 15 days to stop the spread, end quote, was about to expire. In the Rose Garden, Donald Trump declared that lockdowns would continue for another 30 days. I tweeted, quote, President Trump just lost the election, end quote. When Trump announced his 2024 campaign Tuesday, he didn't apologize for the lockdowns or even mention them. I supported him in 2016, and during his tenure, he did much to dredge the political swamps. That's obviously not true. But his decision to approve and extend drastic COVID interventions should disqualify him for a second term. So despite what Marjorie Taylor Greene would have you believe, Donald Trump actually did, at various points, tacitly and explicitly endorse lockdowns during COVID. Now, again, as somebody who criticizes Trump's COVID response as being too inconsistent, too infrequent, attacking his top medical advisors, not following the science as consistently and diligently as he should, not using the bully pulpit of the presidency to, rally the Republican base, Republican governors, Republican senators, Republican congresspeople, Republican politicians in general to take on this national emergency. I will say there were at times where, again, he publicly and explicitly endorsed lockdowns. he should have done it more frequently, right? He should have followed the science more diligently. He was inconsistent on it, but the fact of the matter is he did do it. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene suggests that Democrats are responsible for lockdowns, or that the Biden-Harris administration is responsible for lockdowns, which she's said in the past, and that Republicans didn't engage in lockdowns and that Trump didn't support lockdowns, she is flat out lying, and it's fun to call her out on it. Let me know what you think in the comments.